Welcome, everyone. I'm Jack Llewellyn, and this is Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. So I imagine most of you have heard of fentanyl. You know some of the stories about the fentanyl crisis in America. You probably heard some statistics. You may have heard some politicians talking about the drug. But if you don't know what fentanyl is, how it affects the body, or why it's so dangerous, stick around for a few minutes. I'm going to tell you. So, first thing to know, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that is actually approved by the Food and Drug Administration as both a powerful analgesic, that is a painkiller, and an anesthetic. Now, what makes fentanyl so interesting and so powerful, both as a medical drug and an illegal drug, is the fact that it is said to be 100 times more potent than morphine and 50 times more powerful than heroin. Okay? That's pretty staggering, isn't it? 100 times more powerful than morphine, 50 times more powerful than heroin. Fentanyl is a Schedule II narcotics under the Controlled Substances Act, and it reacts in the body the same as most other opioids. So in that regards, some of the effects of fentanyl on the body include relaxation, euphoria, pain relief, sedation. All of that sounds pretty good. Other effects include confusion, drowsiness, dizziness, nausea and vomiting, urinary retention, pupillary constriction, and respiratory depression. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not really sure what respiratory depression is, but I'm pretty sure it's not good. Now, what is fentanyl really made of as a synthetic opioid? The simple answer is chemicals. Okay? Chemicals that are fused with or synthesized with the opioid poppy, right? And as a result, what you need is a little bit of that natural component and drugs, and then it's a fairly simple process to create fentanyl, a synthetic opioid. Before we get into the manufacture of it, though, I do want to talk about kind of its origins and the legal uses of fentanyl. So fentanyl was developed in the late 1950s and then really introduced in the 60s as an intravenous anesthetic. Okay? So again, as is the case with a lot of illegal drugs, it really started off as a legal drug and a powerful drug, a powerful tool for medical professionals. In fact, legal prescribed fentanyl is used on a regular basis, and there are a number of types of fentanyl that are regularly used and regularly prescribed. There are oral lozenges, sometimes called fentanyl lollipops. There are effervescent tablets, sublingual sprays, nasal sprays, and even injectable formulations. There are also transdermal patches, which we'll talk about in just a second. So that's the legal uses. Illegally, there are many, many ways that fentanyl can be used. It can be injected, snorted, sniffed, smoked, taken orally by pills or tablets. It can also be used with blotter paper. It has a number of different names on the street. Street names include China Girl, Chinatown, China White, Dance Fever, Goodfellas, Great Bear, He-Man, Poison, Tango, and Cash. Now, what makes fentanyl so dangerous, especially how it's used now, is it's often combined with other drugs. Oftentimes heroin, and as we'll talk about in just a minute, oftentimes it's put into pills that look like regular pills. So a lot of times like Xanax or oxycodone, they'll have pills that are manufactured by drug makers, drug traffickers, but they look like the real thing. And that's where the real danger from fentanyl is. Generally speaking, the people who die of fentanyl overdoses don't know they're taking fentanyl. Okay. That, again, is why it's a very insidious drug. And couple that with the fact, because of its potency, it takes just a little bit to be deadly. So, again, what you have is fake pills. You have some powder. You have a mixture with heroin or cocaine sometimes. And drug users are creative. So the fentanyl patches that I was mentioning, they have these little gel patches, that go on your arm. Well, they can do a couple things with it. So they can take the little patch out and remove the gelled contents, and they can ingest it or inject those. They also can take out that gel, freeze it, and then cut it up into little pieces and put it in their cheeks or under their tongue. Various ways in which fentanyl can be used. Again, one of the things that I think is really, really important is illicit fentanyl is being pressed into counterfeit tablets that are sold as commonly misused opioids. Oxycodone, hydrocodone, for example. And then again, some of the more common ones that we talked about, Xanax is one, where the drugs get pressed into those counterfeit tablets, and that's how it ends up being distributed. So it's very rare that they distribute, at least to the end user, raw fentanyl. So we're not going to go into the process of how it's made, but really what's interesting is it's basically a 4-step process. And once you have the precursors, which are the components that go with the opioid itself to make the fentanyl, it's not a complicated process. And for that reason, you can have pop-up labs that manufacture this kind of in the way that you saw pop-up labs for methamphetamines. Again, not difficult, not a complicated process, but we're not going to go into all of the biochemistry on it. Here are some statistics, though, that I think are worth talking about. So, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, in 2021, there were almost 108,000 drug overdose deaths. And two-thirds are said to have been as a result of a fentanyl overdose. It's also said that fentanyl overdoses in 2014 were at about 4,700, and in 2020 they were at about 117,000. Now, because we're going from two different sources, those numbers don't exactly match up, but the exact number doesn't matter. What it is important is that it's a staggering amount, and it continually has been growing. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is a short primer on fentanyl, what it is, how it operates, and the significance of the crisis of fentanyl in the United States today. If you would like to know how China and Mexico are involved in the manufacture and trafficking of fentanyl into the United States, check out our next video coming up in a day or two. That's all for today. Thank you for joining. Please subscribe to Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena.